charging them, so it works out very well. It's a beautiful, simple system.
Simply pointing out realism, like the borders won't be rolled back to what everybody would like them to be in 2014, is not a concession to Vladimir Putin.
Outstanding teachers are tired of political ideology in their curriculum and red tape on their desks.
The president is operating in a very authoritarian, illegal, and unconstitutional way.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, tariff talks. President Trump meets with India's Prime Minister Modi at the White House. A new Trump executive order has the Commerce Secretary going country by country to determine the need for, quote, fair trade tariffs.
If you build here, you have no tariffs whatsoever. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think our country is going to be flooded with jobs.
Meanwhile, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. sworn in despite millions spent by opposition groups against his nomination, and Senator Mitch McConnell siding with Democrats. RFK Jr. takes the helm at the Department of Health and Human Services. And Vice President J.D. Vance in Germany, the Vice President and Secretary of State land in Munich for a major security conference just hours after a car slams into a crowd, injuring dozens of pedestrians. What we know about that attack and the VP's visit. But let's start tonight with CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro and CBS News Chief White House Washington correspondent. He's everything. Washington encompasses everything. Major Garrett. Major, what do you make of what's happening in Europe?
So the statements from the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, yesterday set off alarm bells throughout Europe and Ukraine. No NATO membership, and regaining territory lost during the annexation of Crimea in 2014, unrealistic. Just can't really do that. Basically taking two things off the negotiating table. He walked them back a little bit today in remarks to say if that exactly is the president's negotiating position. And then the president said, I don't disagree with anything that Pete Hegseth said. And by talking to Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader first, and then Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president second, President Trump has clearly indicated who he thinks will decide the terms of settlement of that war, the aggressor, Russia. But does that leave Ukraine in the cold? We don't know yet. The president is sounding as if it won't, but that doesn't mean anxiety already high in Europe isn't higher.
It does seem, Major, that this is a deal that could be cut by Trump and Putin, not by Trump, Putin, and Zelensky.
It could be, but Zelensky has said, you can't cut a deal. You can't disarm us. You can't stop us from fighting. We're the ones who are invaded. We have legitimacy, we have sovereignty, and we have our future to consider. All of those things are real. However, they are stalked and shadowed by the reality of how much money will the United States provide, how much will the Europeans provide, how many drones, weaponry, machinery to fight a war will you possess and for how long? That could not fatally, but dramatically compromise Ukraine's ability to say, no, you can't do anything without us. That's what Ukraine and the rest of Europe fear, and that's not an unreasonable point of anxiety.
We're also tracking the presidential meeting with Modi. What do you hear about how the president is going to handle that with the prime minister?
White House officials told reporters today that one of the priorities is a, quote, fair trade deal. That kind of is in opposition to the reciprocal tariffs announcement that was made today and some of Trump's past comments saying that India is a, quote, big tariff abuser. But the other thing is the defense. One of the White House officials really said that the relationship between America and India is, quote, one of the most critical bilateral relationships in the 21st century. And just because of the proximity to China in that region, defense agreements was a big topic that White House officials previewed, at least, would be a big topic of conversation.
So I just got off the phone with Senator Ron Johnson, who's very close to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Republican from Wisconsin.
Sure.
And he says RFK Jr., now that he's confirmed, is going to go right after what Johnson called corporate capture on the health care front. And you really see a disruptor now taking the helm of HHS.
So the Wall Street Journal about 6 weeks ago had a series of stories about Medicare fraud, about doctors, hospitals being paid way more and using the system to suggest that they were providing services that they weren't, all sorts of misuse of the Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement system. Look, if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and those who he designates goes after things like that, that will be of true and lasting service to the American taxpayer and to the healthcare system in our country. If he does, we'll see. He talks a lot more about areas outside of HHS purview. The foods system in our country.
He's talked about having partnership with agriculture.
Yes, but you need to forge that partnership, and you need to take on that industry. We'll see. He now is empowered by the confirmation process. Only one dissenting vote, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. He is where few people would have imagined he would be 6 months ago, running one of the largest, most important agencies with tentacles and regulatory powers that touch almost every part of the American economy through healthcare.
And you pair what RFK could do with what Doge is already doing as well. They pretty much got the green light, per se, from an executive order President Trump signed earlier this week, saying that federal agencies should work with them for, quote, large-scale reductions in force. We know that Doge employees have had their hands in some sort of way in these agencies. So certainly a space to watch there.
It's so interesting that RFK Jr., as a former presidential candidate, I've been told by sources that President Trump sees him as partly responsible for his own victory.
Absolutely.
Because that bringing in that MAHA coalition.
He's the only person in the Trump cabinet with a subsidiary, full-standing political, not operation,
but a movement,
but vitality, all of its own, separate from Trump, that Trump has to pay attention to, use, harness, and draft off of.
And Trump likes that name, the Kennedy name. And the Kennedy family, of course, some people don't love that RFK Jr. is in the cabinet. Let's listen to President Trump on tariffs, what he had to say about that.
India traditionally is the highest, just about the highest tariffed country. They charge more tariffs than any other country. And, I mean, we'll be talking about that. But, again, whatever they charge us, we're charging them. So it works out very well. It's a beautiful, simple system.
So you had the president there talking about tariffs once again. Is this a negotiating tool or something else? Because I keep hearing that Trump often talks about tariffs as a way of pushing people to move on their position in terms of economic negotiations. But is this something he's really going to be unmovable on?
We know just from his campaign that reducing trade deficits between the U.S. and other countries was a big priority. What I thought was interesting about the order today is it's telling his economic team to start looking at countries. It's not tariffs right away. There's a soft deadline of April 1st. They will investigate the countries that they feel need to have this sort of balance and reciprocal tariffs initiated. And I think that gives countries time to maybe make some negotiations, some counteroffers to the United States. Even though Trump says there are no exemptions, I mean, we could potentially see some positive talks out of the meeting with India today. So certainly provides a timeline for them.
Aaron is absolutely right on this soft deadline, and the markets in New York reacted very favorably. As soon as they heard, oh, it's just a study, and there's 180 days, and maybe April 1st at the beginning, all the markets went up. They were sort of hovering at basically doing nothing, and then boom, about 300 on the top. The assumption is that it is exactly as you described, Robert, a way to negotiate. But it's not just tariffs. It's other things. Value-added taxes, a very big thing in Europe. Fees that you assign for importing or exporting. Lots of different ways to toggle our trade partners in ways to make things more beneficial for U.S. exporters. We have about $1 trillion trade deficit. Let's just take India, for example. Its tariffs are about 9.5%. Well, we charge them about 3.5%. If you equalize those, then that's possibly more revenue for the United States, but possibly India doesn't trade as much or goes elsewhere. The Trump theory is that no one will go elsewhere because this is the biggest, most important market in the world. Maybe yes, maybe no. One thing we know for certain, the Fed has made it clear it's not going to reduce interest rates anytime soon because inflationary pressures remain real, even without tariffs. And if tariffs do in any way, shape, or form, even at the margins, increase inflation, that's going to be harmful not only to the economy, but to one of the president's biggest campaign promises, reducing the cost of living for average Americans.
Major Garrett, Aaron Navarro, thanks for stopping by. We appreciate it. Now to the Vice President, J.D. Vance, in Munich tonight, where he is attending a security conference. The VP and other world leaders touching down in the German city just hours after a man drove his car into a crowd, leaving 28 people injured. Our Tina Kraus has the details.
Police swarmed the scene in the German city of Munich after a driver plowed into a crowd at a labor union rally, injuring more than 24 people, including children. Authorities suspect it was an attack and arrested the man behind the wheel, a native of Afghanistan seeking asylum in Germany. The region's governor demanded consequences,
Anschlag zu Anschlag.
saying we can't go from one attack to another without anything happening. 3 weeks ago, a 2-year-old boy and a man were killed in a knife attack in a German park. The suspect, an Afghan man whose asylum application was rejected. Thursday's incident came just hours before Vice President J.D. Vance and other world leaders arrived for the annual Munich Security Conference. Police don't believe the attack is tied to the event, but they've ramped up patrols in Germany's third largest city. Tina Kraus, CBS News.
Vice President J.D. Vance will address the Munich Security Conference on Friday and meet with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Our Olivia Rinaldi is traveling with the VP. She'll have the latest next. You're watching America Decides. Police in Munich say they don't suspect a link between today's car attack and the vice president's visit. But the city is on edge and security remains tight. Today's incident happening less than a mile from where Vice President Vance and world leaders will meet for a security conference. Our White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi is in Munich with more.
We're here in Munich, Germany, at the site of a suspected car attack. Earlier today, a small Mini Cooper plowed through a crowd that was on this street, injuring 28, many of them children. Now, this all comes as world leaders are descending on this German city for the annual Munich Security Conference, where they discuss the most pressing issues to international security. And top of mind, expected to be the war in Ukraine. Vice President J.D. Vance is going to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky tomorrow, where they're expected to discuss the Trump administration's efforts to end that nearly 3-year-long war. Trump has already spoken this week with President Putin of Russia and Zelensky. Now, we're expected to get a little bit more detail tomorrow about what the end to this war could look like. And Vice President Vance is also expected to address the Munich Security Conference tomorrow. Back to you, Robert Costa.
Olivia Rinaldi, thank you. Today, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth clarified comments he made that he said it's unrealistic for Ukraine to have pre-2014 borders and become a member of NATO. Let's take a listen.
Everything is on the table in his conversations with Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. What he decides to allow or not allow is at the purview of the leader of the free world, of President Trump. So I'm not going to stand at this podium and declare what President Trump will do or won't do.
Let's bring in Sabrina Singh, who served as Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary during the Biden administration. Great to have you here. You have been on the inside as you watch from afar now as someone who served President Biden and Vice President Harris. What do you make of the ramifications of what Secretary Hegseth has said?
Well, look, we saw Secretary Hegseth walk some of his comments back from the previous day, but I think some of that damage is done. When you're saying and you're broadcasting to the world, to Ukraine and to Russia, that NATO membership is off the table, look, that is a huge bargaining chip at the table for Ukraine. That's something that's very important to them, something that they've made very public, and something that, you know, the previous administration said while NATO membership is not for today, it's for a long term, that was something to work towards. So to take that off the table, I think, does tremendous damage, not to mention some of his comments about, you know, sending in a non-NATO force, but not to secure Ukraine and to ensure peace, but not honoring Article 5 potentially. I mean, that sends a lot of ramifications to our allies, and you're seeing that play out at NATO. There, you know, even one of our closest allies, Germany, the Minister of Defense, saying that those comments that Secretary Hegseth made are just not helpful. So it's really concerning.
If the United States were to walk away from funding Ukraine, supporting its effort against Russia, are there other nations in Europe or elsewhere who would step in to the fray, or would Ukraine essentially be on its own?
Well, Ukraine wouldn't be on its own. Under Secretary Austin, the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, it still is intact. It was chaired by the UK. There are many countries, over 50 countries, still sending aid to Ukraine, security assistance. So Ukraine is not standing alone. But if America walks away from Ukraine, we're turning our back on a sovereign country that was invaded by Europe's largest army or largest military. What kind of message does that send? What kind of message does it say we're not going to stand up to bullies on the world stage? I think that does tremendous damage to America's reputation, not only on the world stage, but here at home. So look, Ukraine's not going to stand alone. It's in Europe's best interest if Ukraine continues to fight this war and fight these battles and continue to take back their sovereign territory. But if America does not, if the United States walks away from the table, I really think that not only hurts Ukraine's chances at continuing to claw back their territory, but again, it's the message that you're sending to our allies and partners in the world, the damage that it does to our reputation. I think we really have to think about that as a calculation when it comes to Ukraine.
When I was on Capitol Hill recently, it's evident based on my reporting that President Trump's not out on a limb on Ukraine when it comes to his own party. There's not a ton of fervent support for further funding in the GOP for Ukraine. What's the explanation for that? We all remember 2022 when Ukraine was attacked. That seemed like almost everyone in Congress was wearing a Ukrainian flag on their lapel, but that seems to have fallen away. Is there any way for Ukraine to recover a bit of the support among conservatives and Republicans and others?
Well, look, I think what you're seeing from conservatives on the Hill is certainly the calculation of the war in Ukraine and continued U.S. support that does cost money, that does cost military assistance to go towards continuing to send some of those capabilities to Ukraine. That being said, I have to remind you that there is also bipartisan support in both chambers from Democrats and Republicans to continue to support Ukraine. So I think it is important that Congress passed a bill that allocates money for the Department of Defense to continue these, what we call presidential drawdown packages to allow military assistance to continue to Ukraine. I think there are Republicans in Congress that see the benefit of Ukraine fighting this war rather than drawing Europe and potentially the United States into a war and invoking Article 5 should another European country be attacked by Russia. At the end of the day, Ukraine fighting this war is just more cost effective than Europe and the United States being drawn into a war. So there is bipartisan support in Congress. I think Ukraine continues to make their case on the world stage. And they're having those conversations with this administration as well.
Sabrina Singh, thank you for coming by. We appreciate it and your perspective. Meanwhile, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. clearing the final hurdle as the Senate confirms him as the next Health and Human Services Secretary. Up next, Kash Patel for his possible confirmation. Nicole Killian following it all from Capitol Hill. You're watching America Decides. Danielle Sassoon, the acting U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, resigned after being directed to drop the case against New York Mayor Eric Adams. In a new letter, she wrote to the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, calling the order, quote, baffling. Justice Department correspondent Scott McFarland has been covering this for CBS News. Scott, great to see you. Walk us through her letter to the Attorney General.
Yeah, I'm checking my phone because these developments are coming in so quickly, Bob, so bear with us right now. No matter what happens from here to the end of this evening, this has been a landmark day at the federal courthouse in Manhattan. This acting U.S. attorney, who just took over the position in recent weeks, has stood down from her position amid an objection she has to this order to drop the criminal case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Not only did she stand down from her position, Bob, but she has just revealed in a letter she sent to the new Attorney General, Pam Bondi, that she believes it's improper to drop the case, that the Department of Justice was going to provide a new superseding indictment to add to the charges against Eric Adams, alleging he lied or misled the FBI. And she reveals in her letter to the Attorney General that there was a quid pro quo offered by Eric Adams' attorneys to the Department of Justice, promising help on immigration matters for the Trump administration if they dropped the case. Eric Adams' defense attorneys have denied that accusation, but that's not all. A second and third acting Department of Justice official have both stood down also as the Department of Justice tried to hand them the matter of USA versus Eric Adams. 3 people all gone from the department over this issue. And Bob, as the courthouse closed in Manhattan late today, the case against Eric Adams is still there, has not yet been dismissed.
So, Scott, what else is happening inside the Justice Department beyond this episode in terms of resignations, unrest?
A lot of resignations and fears of a larger scale purge. We have this list of about 5,000 FBI agents and FBI employees. It's been circulating for about a week now. Agents and employees who were part of the January 6th investigation. The acting leaders of the Department of Justice said that list is being compiled and was handed over because those employees might face disciplinary actions, potentially including firing, termination. There are line prosecutors who've been fired for being part of the January 6 prosecutions, and there are fears there could be many more firings of prosecutors to come. And, Bob, there are newer FBI agents and employees, those who've been there a short period of time, as many as 1,000, concerned they'll be purged as well as they try to cut these new employees in many agencies across the government. It's not a matter of whether there'll be a purge at the Department of Justice, Bob. It's a matter of how large a purge.
Scott McFarlane, as ever, on top of the story. Thank you. President Trump's cabinet expanded today. The Senate confirmed Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Health and Human Services Secretary in a 52-48 vote. Members of the Senate Judiciary Committee also advanced the nomination of Kash Patel as FBI director. It now heads to the Senate floor for a full chamber vote in the coming days. Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill. Nicole, great to see you. Let's start with RFK Jr., Senator McConnell of Kentucky, the former leader, the only Republican to vote against his confirmation. What does that reveal about the cohesion in the GOP around RFK, who was seen as widely seen as controversial?
Yeah, well, certainly Leader McConnell, or the former leader, has made clear that he does not always follow the grain, and he has opposed several of the president's nominees, whether that is RFK Jr., just the other day, Tulsi Gabbard, and, of course, Pete Hegseth for defense secretary. In terms of his opposition today for RFK Jr., basically he kind of warned as much at the time of RFK Jr.'s nomination, explaining that he was a polio survivor. And he really kind of took issue with trying to put these disproven theories out into the atmosphere. So in a statement today, he said that I will not condone the relitigation of proven cures, and neither will millions of Americans. So that's in part why he did not support Kennedy's nomination. But obviously it wasn't enough to stop Kennedy from being confirmed today.
Education Secretary nominee Linda McMahon, Nicole, appeared on Capitol Hill today for her confirmation hearing. Let's listen to an exchange she had regarding the potential shuttering of the Department of Education.
Yes or no, do you agree that since the department was created by Congress, it would need an act of Congress to actually close the Department of Education?
And certainly President Trump understands that we'll be working with Congress. We'd like to do this right. We'd like to make sure that we are presenting a plan that I think our senators could get on board with and our Congress could get on board with, that would have a better functioning Department of Education, but certainly does require congressional action.
Nicole, President Trump has said he wants the department to be closed, quote, immediately. So how significant is it that his pick to lead the department believes he would need congressional approval to do so?
Well, look, even though Linda McMahon was very measured in her testimony today, for instance, she made clear that education would not be defunded, that really this was about trying to make the Department of Education more efficient. At the same time, she did suggest that it was possible that some functions of the Department of Education could be outboarded to other federal agencies, for instance, like HHS, in terms of dealing with children who may have special needs or disabilities. That being said, I caught up earlier today with former Education Secretary Arne Duncan and asked him whether or not, after McMahon's testimony today, if he feels that the Department of Education is more or less at risk. Take a listen.
The Department of Education's at extraordinary risk, but even more importantly, public education in America is under assault. And I desperately hope Linda McMahon comes with a pure heart and comes to help create opportunity and to help kids. We have a crisis educationally in our country now, a reading crisis. There's not a single thing that President Trump has said that would help a single child learn to read or learn to read faster. And so this is all about dismantling public education.
And he also expressed a lot of concern if the department were dismantled in any way, or if some of those services and funding were outboarded, what impact that could have downstream. Obviously, he's also a former superintendent of Chicago Public Schools. And so he talked about some of those real world impacts, whether that is on Pell Grants in terms of higher education, whether that is, again, helping students with special needs, low income students. So he said he's very concerned about the state of education. I also asked him if if he felt Linda McMahon was qualified for this position. And while he didn't say one way or the other, he did say that he thought that the president could have picked other people who were less qualified and not up to the task. So again, as you heard him there say, he doesn't necessarily know her heart, but he certainly believes in preserving the department, if at all possible.
Nicole, as you know, Democratic Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota announced she will not run for re-election next year. What's the mood on Capitol Hill about this? Does this make the Minnesota Senate race competitive in 2026, and who might jump in?
Yeah, I think we're already off to the races with that one, Bob, because, we saw a number of senators come out with statements today from her fellow Senator Amy Klobuchar praising the work of Tina Smith, to Leader Chuck Schumer, who also praised Tina Smith as a remarkable senator, but said he believes that they will keep the seat blue. Shortly thereafter, however, we saw the NRSC put out a statement. Of course, Tim Scott now leading the NRSC, saying that we believe Minnesota is in play. So again, we're already off to the races, even hours into this announcement. But certainly there is a possibility of, a short list already that's starting to circulate, or whether that is someone like the former vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, who said he may be exploring another run for governor, but also may be open to considering the Senate seat. So we'll have to see kind of what other names may emerge in the future.
Governor Walz maybe in the Senate. We'll have to see. Nicole Killian, thank you. Senator Mitch McConnell once again voting with the Democrats in terms of a Trump nomination, voting no on another Trump cabinet nominee. Our political panel will weigh in next on all of that. You're watching America Decides. So the Republican Party largely remained united in recent days in confirming President Trump's cabinet nominations. Former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, though, has at times been his party's only dissenting voice. He was the lone Republican who voted no against Tulsi Gabbard in her nomination for Director of National Intelligence yesterday. And today, he voted against Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for Health and Human Services Secretary. To discuss all of this, let's bring in our political panel, Lisa Acevedo and Kevin Sheridan. She previously served as communications director for Doug Emhoff, and Kevin served as the spokesperson for the RNC and a senior advisor for the Romney Ryan campaign. Thanks for having you both here. Appreciate it. Thank you. What do you make of McConnell?
Well, listen, when you think about the vote today, especially as it pertained to RFK, this is personal for McConnell, right? He had a childhood polio. But then what struck me, I think, was the president's reaction to the way McConnell voted, calling him a bitter guy. So I think when I think about the Republicans and their place in the Senate and the House right now, some of them might be intimidated to go against the current president, right? They may be saying, hey, if I vote against him, I'm going to have some political implications here. Mitch McConnell at this point, he has nothing to lose. He's had a long-standing career in the United States Senate, and he's served his time well.
What do you make of it?
As long as Collins and Murkowski don't join with him, and even if they do, they still need one more. Mitch McConnell can do what Mitch McConnell wants to do at this point. It's ironic that he was whipping votes just a few months ago, and now he's on the other side of that. But it is personal, obviously, with him. It wasn't personal about Hegseth or.
He says it's not personal in his statements.
Well, yeah, he said that. He said it was on the vaccines. That's perfectly understandable coming from his perspective, but. The real question is, does he try to throw a wrench in the works when this gets serious? And that's the big, beautiful bill. That's some real legislative challenges that the Republicans have to get done because they ran on it and they won on it.
Where are the Democrats these days in terms of, now that most of the cabinet's getting through and looks like Republicans are going to stamp their approval on the Trump nominees, what do the Democrats do now? What's kind of the mode of operation moving ahead?
Yeah, it's a great question. Remember, the Democrats, we don't have the White House, we don't have the House, we don't have the Senate, right?
So what do you have?
So, well, we have officials in the states right now. We have our state and local leaders, and that's what we need to look to. But you also saw today that Democrats were united, right? They were united yesterday against Gabbard in the vote. They were united today against RFK in the vote. So it's good to see a sign of unity from the Democrats. And I think they need to continue to frankly remain united and make a little bit of noise out there, talk directly to their constituents. And when there's something that happens, whether it's Trump or a cabinet official, they need to continue to be out there with their constituencies, letting them know why they should be concerned.
It is interesting, just to follow up on that. You look at some of the accountability efforts on the Democratic side being done by state attorney generals, going after President Trump's use of executive power. Is that really where the action seems to be?
Well, the president's going back at them, right? You're saying his comments and you're saying exactly what he's saying. Well, maybe we should get rid of some of these judges.
What are traditional Republicans? You worked for the Romney-Ryan campaign. When I know you've adjusted to the new reality of the Republican Party, but for those who come out of a more traditional bearing in the GOP, what do they think of President Trump's use of executive power? Is it something they applaud, generally speaking?
I can't speak for all of them,
course.
but I think if you look at the numbers and the conversations that I have, the Republican Party has never been more united than it is right now. That's just a fact by the numbers. There are going to be people who push back on some of his policies from time to time, but the writing is on the wall. Donald Trump led the entire Republican Party this time. It wasn't, fractious in any way. It was a very clear mandate. He won all 7 swing states. So Republicans are going to have a very hard time going against him, knowing that there's the whole MAGA network out there, both online and in the grassroots. And if they want to keep their jobs, I think right now they're going to go with the Trump agenda until they can't. And that hasn't even come close to happening yet.
What about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? He ran for president first as a Democrat, then as an independent, and he has this MAHA, Make America Healthy Again movement, coalition, whatever you want to call it. How are Democrats dealing with President Trump co-opting that RFK Jr. movement into his own political coalition? Because a lot of people who support RFK Jr. now in the cabinet were either independents or longtime Democrats.
Sure. Well, I think you saw it today, right? A little bit. Democrats, again, uniting, coming together. They were unanimous in voting against RFK. But let's make no mistake, right? The midterms are essentially right around the corner. So they're going to need to do everything that they can to reach voters, right? And so if RFK does something now in his position again, if Donald Trump does something and the Democrats see it as unfit, they need to call it out. And they need to be crystal clear and blunt about that.
Is RFK Jr. the most influential member of the cabinet?
I don't know about that. I think you could make a case that because he's taking the party in a different direction that he may be. The MAHA movement is a real thing. It cuts across both parties, and a lot of moms out there want to see what he's going to do. So we'll see how he acts, what his first priorities are. If he goes in there and he wants data on vaccines, or if he wants, the additives out of foods. How does that all look? How does he execute it? He may well be one of the most influential because he comes from a different perspective than anybody else. Ultimately, Donald Trump's in charge of the cabinet. He's going to lead the policies that he ran on, and I think RFK Jr. was a big part of his election victory, though, and he earned his place there.
We're going to have to leave it there. Appreciate you both coming by. Come back again sometime soon. A lot to discuss, a lot happening in Washington and across the country. Appreciate your perspectives. With the freeze now on foreign aid, some out there are raising a red flag about an Ebola outbreak in Uganda, how a lack of funds could worsen the situation in that African nation. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. The Trump administration's foreign aid freeze happening as a deadly Ebola outbreak spreads in Uganda. The virus has killed 1 person and infected at least 8 others. Some health officials in the U.S. are expressing concern that with USAID and its future in limbo, this could perhaps get worse. The aid pause has already led to an understaffed contact tracing and screening of departing travelers from Uganda. Dr. Craig Spencer joins us now. He's an emergency medicine physician and an associate professor at Brown University, their School of Public Health. He's also a survivor of Ebola. Thanks for being here. You have worked to combat infectious diseases here and globally. What does this mean as we watch this outbreak? And does USAID and the disruptions in Washington matter or not, in your view?
Well, I think you gave a good summary. We're at about 9 cases, and this outbreak was first announced a couple of weeks ago. It appears that right now this is under control, but that's because the Ugandan Ministry of Health has really great, capable people, and because the World Health Organization stepped up and did a lot of the things that the United States generally would support and fund. Let me tell you what would normally happen and then what happened here and why that concerns me. Normally, you would have, within a few hours of an outbreak being reported, the CDC mobilizing teams to go and respond on the ground. Some of the best viral hemorrhagic fevers in the world are doctors and people in the world are in Atlanta. That did not happen this time around. You would have USAID help mobilize support to set up border screening at the airport in Kampala, a very big airport in Entebbe that has links all over the world. That did not happen. The USAID support did not materialize. That was done by WHO. So others have stepped up as we've retreated. The problem is that how long are they going to be able to do that for? There's also an outbreak of Marburg virus in neighboring Tanzania, which is very similar to Ebola without any treatments or vaccines. There's Mpox, which is currently circulating next door in DR Congo. And just 2 days ago, there was a report of a new variant here in New York State. So not having USAID, not having CDC, and not being able to even talk to our partners at the World Health Organization is making us a lot more vulnerable, and it's going to make it a lot harder to end these outbreaks where they are before they can spread further.
What happens now in places like Uganda? What are they on edge about, if anything?
Well, Uganda is dealing with more than just Ebola. It also had support from PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which for the past 22 years, since started by George Bush, has been providing medication for HIV and helping drive down new cases and stabilizing cases of HIV all over the world. One of the most successful global health programs ever, has saved 25 million people to date. But I know right now friends of my own that were working on that program in Uganda, in Rwanda, in Burundi, who had to let staff go because the money overnight just disappeared. It wasn't able to be distributed because around 10 days ago, Elon Musk said they're going to throw USAID into the wood chipper. The impact was immediate. It's not just Ebola, it's not just HIV, but it's our eyes and ears in Uganda, in Rwanda, in many other countries. In the past, we have those relationships. We would know what was happening as soon as things develop. Right now, we're not even having those conversations. We're not in the room where those things are being discussed. And because of that, we have no transparency. We're not able to prepare here. And because of that, that makes us a lot more at risk. And it makes it a lot harder to address these threats where they are in places with the people that we've worked with for a really, really long time.
A judge, as you know, blocked the Trump administration from cutting medical research this week. So what is the impact of that, if that actually holds?
Yeah, so the proposal was to cut the indirect rates for NIH funding, which goes out and supports the best biomedical science in the world. If you look at the places around the globe that do the most cutting edge research in medicine and in health, they're mostly right here in the United States because the NIH supports them and then provides indirect costs to make sure that we're able to hire people, keep the lights on, make sure that we're able to hire staff. And the proposal is going to cut a lot of that. Some institutions will lose tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. Talking to my friends that are responsible for leading many of these institutions, they've said to me, I'm going to have to fire a lot of people. I'm going to have to stop a lot of the work that we're doing on things like cancer research, on things like trying to find, new treatments and therapies for diseases that have been underway for quite some time. And tying it all back, there is now Ebola treatments and Ebola vaccines that didn't exist 10 years ago when I was working in West Africa. We have them now because NIH funded and supported work. If we cut that research off right now, we are going to be cutting off access to future treatments for other diseases that we don't have treatments for. That will make people less safe in those outbreaks in Uganda and elsewhere, but it'll also mean that if those things come here, we're not going to have access to them because they don't exist, because we're no longer investing in them.
Dr. Craig Spencer, thank you.
Thank you.
More than 3 months after Election Day, November judicial race in North Carolina remains undecided. We'll take a closer look at the race and How a winner has not yet been declared, talking to a top Democrat and getting their view on that situation. You're watching America Decides. More than 3 months later, one race from the 2024 general election still remains undecided. It's in North Carolina. Republican candidate for the state Supreme Court, Judge Jefferson Griffin, is seeking to invalidate more than 60,000 ballots cast during the election. The North Carolina State Board of Elections is asking the same court to take up the dispute after Griffin's appeal was denied. Following multiple recounts, the latest vote tally shows Griffin trailing Democratic incumbent Supreme Court Justice Allison Riggs by just 734 votes. Anderson Clayton joins us now. She is the chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party. Thanks for being with us. What is the latest status of this race?
Well, right now, what we're seeing is that Jefferson Griffin has appealed the Wake County Superior Court decision that stood by the 67,000 legal voters that Judge Jefferson Griffin and Republicans are challenging in the state of North Carolina right now. He's appealed that to the Court of Appeals, which he currently sits on as a judge that's also had 2 other Republican judges donate to his campaign to carry this forward and try to invalidate election results from the 2024 election. North Carolina is the last uncertified statewide race in the country. And we know Republicans are using our state right now as the petri dish to see what they can accomplish with stealing state elections and using the Trump era playbook in North Carolina that they're going to take to every other state afterwards if they can.
Why does this race matter so much for Democrats nationally? Why should people pay attention?
Because if they're successful in these court fights right now, HAVA voters, which is part of the voters that are being challenged, which are voters that were originally, grandfathered in under the Help Americans Vote Act, which helped require states to be able, it was passed in 2002, and it helped require states to be able to ask voters to, when they registered to vote, either have one of 2 different numbers attached to your driver's license form, a social security number, the last 4 digits of it, or your driver's license number. But anyone registered to vote before 2002 and got grandfathered in, and this doesn't apply to. But that's the exact type of voters that Republicans are coming after right now in the state of North Carolina. Those voters are in every single state across the country. So it's 65,000 or 67,000 voters in North Carolina right now. It's 150,000 voters in Arizona or Pennsylvania or any of our other battleground states in 26. And we know right now that Republicans, our last time to really hold them accountable before 2028 is going to be in our 26 midterms, especially here in North Carolina with Tom Tillis' seat up as our Republican United States Senate rep right now that's endorsed everything that Donald Trump is putting up, especially when it comes to appointments right now.
And looking at that upcoming Senate race, what is the state of play in North Carolina as you look at 2026 in the midterms?
Well, we know we've got a lot of very qualified people to run statewide, and we're excited about the opportunity to get behind them. And the North Carolina Democrats are putting up every advantage right now that we have in terms of infrastructure. We're keeping on a year-round organizing staff that's maintaining a presence on the ground. We're making sure we've got 100 strong county party chapters out there that we're investing in. And so if you'd like to help us out with that or get involved, you can go to ncdp.org, and we'd love to have your help.
And just one final thing here. When we look at this race, the North Carolina State Board of Elections is now asking the state Supreme Court to hear the case. The court currently has 5 judges appointed by Republicans and 2 appointed by Democrats, including Judge Allison Riggs. How concerned are you that the vote will be in Griffin's favor?
Well, we had a decision that came down from the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals that also said anything that came out of our North Carolina Supreme Court, we could take back to the Eastern District and appeal there. And so we know that the Republican-dominated Supreme Court in North Carolina right now is not our friend. There are people that have legalized gerrymandering in our state. There are people that have brought back voter disenfranchisement with voter ID in our state. These courts are not our friend, but we know that we have the ability to outmaneuver Republicans in this, and we've done our job to do that thus far, especially in these lawsuits. And so we're expecting that Republicans on the Supreme Court do us dirty and honestly do not uphold free and fair elections in North Carolina right now. I hope they prove me wrong, but I don't expect Republicans to do so right now in our state.
We appreciate your perspective on the Democratic Party and its view on what's happening in North Carolina. Anderson Clayton, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.